Hi, and welcome to the latest installment of my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. In this episode, I want to consider one of the greatest compliments a reader can pay your writing, namely when they say they couldn't put your book down. And I want to see if we can find a way of achieving this blessed state. It's going to be an interesting ride. We will look at the work of the great movie maker Alfred Hitchcock. We'll take a clue from the popularity of witch burnings in the Middle Ages, and we'll consider the difference between surprise and suspense when applied to the fate of a man who's going to have his penis cut off. But first, to set the mood, we'll take the bus to the High Street and absorb the atmosphere of this place, Brasenose College. This is where John Buchan, author of the 39 Steps, studied, a book later turned into a masterpiece of suspense by the great movie maker Alfred Hitchcock. Not far from here too is a spot where 3 martyrs were burned at the stake in the 16th century. What do these 3 things have in common? 2 words: morbid curiosity. To demonstrate what I mean by that, I want to take you back to a life-changing encounter I had on a London bus in 1991. It was a night bus from Baker Street to Putney, and about 3 a.m. on the top deck, I met a Japanese girl and fell in love, and we started dating. And on one of our first dates, she asked me to take her to see a Japanese movie that was showing at some local cinema. It was called Ai no Corrida, which translates as In the Realm of the Senses. She explained that she couldn't watch it in Japan because it was banned. Well, I'd never heard of it, but it happens to be one of the most notorious movies ever made, principally because it features a lot of explicit sexual intercourse, much of it unsimulated. The movie begins with what I would say is a pretty good hook. We open on a tramp drunkenly asleep in the snow of a Japanese village, and the village children approach with a stick and lift the hem of his coat that's just above the knee to reveal that he's not wearing any underpants. And the children then start throwing snowballs at what the Japanese call his meat and 2 veg. Well, this is quite an unusual start to a movie, and I looked across quizzically at my Japanese girlfriend, and she was staring intensely at the screen. And the rest of the movie is basically wall-to-wall sexual intercourse between the 2 protagonists, the owner of the hotel and one of the maids. Well, it's not particularly interesting. I mean, watching 2 people have sex for 2 hours is not compelling viewing, in my view. And of course the director knows this, so he uses a device that absolutely guarantees you do not take your eyes off the screen for 1 moment. It's morbid curiosity combined with suspense, because early on in the movie the maid takes the man's penis and holds a knife up to the base as if threatening to cut it off. And he laughs scornfully and says whatever the Japanese equivalent of, "You'll be cutting your nose off to spite your face if you do that, love." And again, I looked across at my Japanese girlfriend, and once again she was staring, intensely absorbed at the screen. And the thing is, I hardly knew this girl really, and she'd already moved in with me. Well, as you can imagine, from that moment on, I spent the entire movie with my knees tightly clenched, because I knew with utter certainty that at some point the maid was going to do it. And sure enough, at the end of the movie, she does indeed make good on her threat. And the whole thing reminds me of a famous remark made by the great filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock. He once explained the difference between surprise and suspense. He said, imagine a couple is dining in a restaurant and there is a bomb under the table. Well, if no one knows about it, the bomb will explode and give the audience 2 or 3 seconds of surprise. Whereas if the audience watch the anarchist plant the bomb, then they will be riveted on the edge of their seats for the whole time. This is suspense. And the same thing applies to the cutting off of the man's penis, doesn't it? Because if we hadn't been warned up front, then when the moment came to cut it off, it would have occasioned a few seconds' astonishment. But because I knew it was going to happen, I spent the whole damn movie squirming in an agony of terrified expectation. And the thing is, I didn't even want to see it be cut off. Yet it's like driving past a car crash on the motorway, isn't it? You have to look. Hence the popularity of witch burnings in the Middle Ages. Morbid curiosity and suspense. And the reason this matters is because, as I said in previous videos, One of the fundamental principles of good storytelling is the arousal of curiosity. You continually make the reader wonder what happens next. But a lot of new writers misinterpret this and write in a rather coy manner. They withhold information in the hope that this will somehow arouse curiosity, but it doesn't. You can engender far more curiosity by letting the cat out of the bag. For example, a great debut novel of recent years was The Virgin Suicides, which reveals on the very first page that 5 teenage girls from the same family committed suicide. Now, ordinarily I'd be tempted to say spoiler alert, because I'm giving away the plot. But actually it's the author, Jeffrey Eugenides, who gives away the plot on page 1. And far from diminishing your curiosity, it merely enhances it, because you absolutely have to read on to find out what the story behind this is. Letting the cat out of the bag, although it may seem contrary to instinct, can be a very powerful storytelling technique. This is what Hitchcock had to say on the matter.
Moving on to 1930 and Murder, which you've described as your first important whodunit.
And only whodunit.
Ah.
I've never made a whodunit since. Very simple reason. The whodunit contains no emotion. The audience are wondering. They're not emoting. They're not apprehensive for anyone. When the film is finished and the revelation comes, well, you get 2 or 3 minutes of saying, ah, I told you so, or I thought so, or fancy that. I prefer to do the suspense film by giving all the information to the audience at the beginning of the picture, or early on in the picture. Then they won't wonder. They'll be apprehensive for the individual.
So the moral of the story is don't worry about letting the cat out of the bag. It works if you can announce good things in advance, but that bad things cast a far more powerful spell. In the next video I want to discuss what makes a memorable villain, and I will deploy the morbid curiosity card now when I say I will consider the case of a woman who donated a kidney to her boss, and when he got back from convalescing he fired her. Anyway, at the end of the movie, in the realm of the senses, the maid uses a severed penis as a calligraphy brush and paints her name on a man's chest. And with that image reverberating in my heart, we made our way out to the street. And I looked at my Japanese girlfriend and said, well, that was an interesting film. And she said that she was in a state of shock. She apologized profusely and said she had no idea it was going to be like that. And she was deeply ashamed. And I believed her. Although when we got home I hid all the kitchen knives.